My name is Don Keelan, and you're on Q&A Live from the Q&A Live. The Q&A Live. Please tune in and call in with your questions. What we want to do tonight is to have you call in, ask questions of the... Have someone like you here. Good evening, I'm Don Keelan, host of Q&A Live, and welcome to the show tonight. Our guest tonight is Senator Jim Jeffords of Vermont, and before we introduce the Senator, let me just make a few announcements. First, I'd like to wish Elizabeth Parker all the best. She was our producer, and she's moving on to the Southern Berkshires, where she'll be the Executive Director of the Berkshire Access Television. Also, our sound man, he's moving on to Savannah College, and I want to wish him all the best. Richard Ellis was with us from the beginning of the show, and he's moving on. I'd also like to make another announcement, and that is, in our last show, Governor Dean threw out a challenge, and that was to get Judy Livingston and Walter Freed back on the show to talk about Act 60, Walter being the Speaker of the House, Judy being the state representative. Well, Judy and Walter have agreed to come on the show, and the governor has agreed to come back to the show, and we had scheduled September 12th to be that airing of that debate on Act 60 right here at North Shore Access. Unfortunately, the governor has a family problem which he's dealing with. We wish him well with that, and we're going to reschedule that at a later time. One other thing about the governor, and that is at the last show he did mention that there's some bit of chaos in the state tax department, and that chaos caused by American Management, the consulting firm, but he said it will get straightened out. Since then, the U.S. Government Employee Retirement Office has fired American Management, and the state of Mississippi, which was suing American Management for $350 million, has settled the suit with American Management for $188 million. So I hope we don't have a problem here in the tax department of Vermont, but it appears like we really might, and we'll follow that up with the governor as we move forward. Tonight we have a very special guest, Senator Jim Jeffords, and we're privileged to have him. Senator Jeffords was born in Rutland in 1934. In 1956, he moved to, graduated from Yale University, and in 3 years in the United States Navy. After that, he moved on to Harvard Law School, where he received a law degree in 1962. His dad, Olin Jeffords, was the Chief Justice of the Vermont Supreme Court, married to Elizabeth Daly. They have 2 children, Laura and Leonard. The senator went on to become a state senator, and a brief time in that office, he then moved on to become the Vermont Attorney General. In 1974, he ran for the U.S. Congress and was elected and served in the U.S. Congress up until 1988, where he became a United States Senator. In 1975, when he took office, that was at the time of the Ford administration. So we're talking many years ago. It seems like 6 administrations ago. The senator had chaired the Welfare, Pension, Labor, and Education Committee. I should say not the welfare. I think there's another name for that. I'll have him correct me on that. That has now been turned over, I believe, to Senator Kennedy, and the senator now chairs the Environmental and Public Works Committee, a major committee in the Congress that services, I think, thousands of programs, and a very important committee, as well as service on many other committees. So, with nothing more from me at this point, let me invite out here Jim Jeffords, Senator from Vermont.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Senator. Yeah. Watch the water right behind you there. A little glass of water for you.
Hey, fine. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, and pleased to see Madeline Harwood. back, Madeline. How are you? She gave me the closest race I ever had. And that was quite a few years ago. So I'm always pleased to be in this area. It's a beautiful area. The state had a wonderful day. This is not a letdown, but I spent most of the day being questioned by a fellow that
our competition.
Yes, right.
Our 60 Minutes, and but the difference between us and them, Senator, is that we don't have any commercial breaks, and we'll give you more than 15 minutes. So, so we look forward to.
It was fascinating to be with Mike Wallace. It was an interesting experience. Never had been on before, but I'm looking forward to this, which I know will be feistier.
Oh, probably. That's up to you. Yeah, I was told to behave. I should point out, I should have mentioned in the introduction that the Senator does enjoy martial arts and skiing, and now has taken up a new occupation of recreation, and that is writing. And I can relate a little bit to that. And did you bring a copy of your new book with you?
I have one in the car, I think, but we're not that far along yet. It's in the process of being printed. It will be out on the book stands in early September.
The book, if I'm right, My Declaration of Independence?
Yes.
And by Simon & Schuster?
Yes.
And as someone who's been involved in writing books, how do you get a book done so quickly, unless you've been working on it for a long time? I mean, prior to the announcement in May.
A little bit of both, but I have people that volunteered to help out. And I had Mark Powden, who, because of my change, was leaving, who stayed on to put the book together and really do the finishing on the editing of it. And it's a tough job putting the book together. I didn't realize it until we got going, but it's I think, an excellent book, and it gives you some real insight into the workings of Congress and the power struggles and how I came to conclude that what I had to do was to basically walk across the aisle and change the parties. We can get into that, I guess.
Well, we'll be getting into that later,
right,
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I probably should tell our audience that the way I'd like to structure tonight's program is if you could hold your questions for about 15 minutes. I mentioned to the Senator that it's a real privilege to have someone from the national scene who has their hands on national and international issues. Sometimes these green mountains and tectonic mountains protect us from what's going on in the rest of the world. And having someone like you here tonight, maybe you can shed some light on some of the issues, and we can talk about that. Definitely we'll be getting into the leaving and also about the books. But I would like to cover one question regarding your decision, and that is, because we did have the governor on last month, as you know. Is there any truth to the rumor that this time next year that you might be running for his job and Governor Dean, running for your job?
Well, let me see. How shall I answer? No.
There's no truth to that rumor?
No truth to that rumor.
At this time, or will there be truth to that rumor later on?
It'll be, it's still, well, it's not a true rumor.
It's not a true rumor. Okay.
No, I was thinking about, seriously, I was thinking about coming back and running for governor, but under the system we set up, and this came about at a time when we had, I think, 10 new senators or something who all of a sudden looked at their future and realized that if they wanted to be chairman of a committee, they might never get there because there was a bunch of us that were not elderly, shall we say, and you just stayed on as chairman until something horrible happened to you. So they decided that they would sort of go on strike and say, we want term limits on chairman. And so I had an 8-year term limit, which would have ended next year. And thus I thought seriously about then maybe at that point coming back rather than to just be there without having a chairmanship would be kind of a downer.
Well, I asked the question in the context that maybe many of our viewers aren't aware of, and that is you did have a run for the gubernatorial office, the governor's office back in 1972 against Luther Hackett, and
right.
And then also again you were thinking of it, if I'm not mistaken, in 1982.
Yes.
Then when Richard Snelling ran as well. We'll cover that later, but that's the background of.
Yes,
I know you had this inclination.
No, I love Vermont, and any way I can serve, I will serve until I decide that maybe they're sick of me and they'll decide, or we'll go on to retirement. But I'm going to be in the Senate right now as long as I can look forward to.
Well, Shrewsbury is a lot better than 7th Street in Washington, but we'll leave that up to you.
Yes.
Let me move now across the ocean to the Mideast. I mentioned that we're going to
Yes.
cover some international, national, state, and then obviously personal affairs, and some in that order. But by having you here, maybe you can give us a brief insight. The Mideast, it appears like it's ready to go, blow up again on us. I mentioned earlier, you've been in Washington with almost 6 administrations, all the way back to Gerald Ford. And we appear to still be wrestling with this gorilla, if you will. And with 3 issues, the Palestinian refugees, what to do with Jerusalem, and what to do with the expansion. If you were in charge, and you didn't have to answer to anyone, what would you do?
Well, let me go back into history a little bit, because I did have an opportunity when the new senator came in 1993, I believe it was. I think Clinton came in. And I had an opportunity to travel with Arlen Specter to the Middle East. And it was a very fascinating time. We started in Syria, and we met with the representatives of the Syrian. Assad was not there, but they took that opportunity to use me as a messenger to let it be known that they would be willing to work something out on the Golan Heights and be willing to move back from that and to have just as a gesture for peace sort of thing. So we passed that on to the heads of Egypt and also Israel. So I got involved in just by being there as being a messenger and better understanding the problems there. But no progress, as you know, of any great movement has been made since that time, even though they have eased in those areas of Golan Heights and some of that. But right now it's back to where it was as far as the high stakes and the level of things. It's just very sad. I don't know how it's finally going to work out. But this nation has to do all it can to try and bring peace about in that area, especially working through the other nations there as well.
Are you at liberty to tell us if you were solely in charge, this is what you would do? Roosevelt was asked that question in '43, and he said, sort of facetiously, I would give half of Jerusalem to the Jewish people, half to the Palestinians, and then put barbed wire around all of the sacred monuments and religious sites. Now that's sort of drastic. What would you do if you had to call the shots? Well, I think about this all the time. And
I thought they were coming pretty close to negotiating what should happen in Jerusalem. And I think until they do that and get an understanding that people have to live together, and that the Jerusalem can be either whether it's divided or separated or some international way that is devised to allow people to move freely back and forth in Jerusalem and to try to reduce the tensions there. I think that's the key to it. And I thought they were well on their way with Mitchell and before and trying to find that solution. And it looked like it was quite a possible end of the situation there, but then of course it fell apart. And until there's a true interest, especially in the leaders, of really wanting to solve the problem, I get the feeling sometimes in those areas that that's their whole life. They grew up in it, they've lived it, and they wouldn't know what to do if they didn't have it. That's a sad situation, and how you change the dynamics of that, I don't know, but I think we have a role to play, and we should try to do what we can using those who are closer to the problem than we are to try and move things along.
Going north for a moment across the Mediterranean, across the Adriatic to Macedonia, Kosovo, do you see us now, with the moving now into Macedonia, do you see NATO and the U.S., this is not going to be another Vietnam, will it, in your opinion?
I don't believe it will, but it's a troubled area. My long-term feeling, and it's not exactly one that settles too well with some people, but the United Nations has to be brought to bear with the resources necessary to get involved in these matters. I think we still have to operate internationally with the kinds of organizational structures we have now to try to deal with it. But until we can get the United Nations involved in a more way that will better work for resolutions as well as enforcement, we're always going to be tagged with these problems.
Do you feel that the way in which the administration is handling that situation, as well as Iraq, Russia, and China, from your perspective, do you feel that they could be doing something different, or what they're doing is satisfactory, at least given the what we know today?
Well, I don't know. I think I don't think
wide-ranging.
we've seen any real attention to trying to find the solutions that we should in that area. Again, I'd like to see us looking more through international organizations, structures, rather than being responsible for it. But what that means in the sense of the structure of the United Nations, I don't see right now as enough leadership in our, at least, nation of wanting to get involved in turning more over the United Nations. But I think the future has to come through multinational solution.
When you get to visit the White House, do you get to mention to the President or his Colin Powell, the Secretary of State, how you feel on this, or what he might do, or what they might do differently? How do you get to express your feelings on that?
Well, generally, if you're on the committees involved, the Foreign Relations Committee, you would have that opportunity. You would take that opportunity to do that. Or if you're in the armed services, I don't have a committee that's really involved in those areas. So it's to take the time of the secretary or all without really any ability to do something about it. You don't usually do that or try to do that.
When we get to watch what goes on in those committees on C-SPAN or C-SPAN 2, you get to see those representatives from the administration going back and forth with the committee members. Is there more to it than that? That's the public, what the public sees. Is there, if you can give us an insider's view on, is there things that go on behind the scenes that don't really get discussed in the front there?
Oh, yes, there are, among, again, still the same people in that sense, but not burdened with the media attention or having to be careful on every word that you say, sort of off the front stage discussions where you get much more done because you can be really express yourself.
Let me just jump over now to Asia for a second, and with some countries, and also Africa, some countries in Central Africa, Indonesia, Afghanistan, maybe the Philippines. It appears that some countries are just losing the ability to govern. Is that a concern that you've discussed down in Washington? And
Well,
anarchy seems like it's reigning in some.
I know a long time ago I spent several weeks in Indonesia and at a time just after a crisis. So it was an extra educational opportunity to try and study and understand how these nations work. And then they have staggered along with a semi-democratic process in Indonesia. And now they're again under stress. But the institutional understanding of how to get along in a democratic kind of organization is just not there, and it's very difficult to build upon that. But I think we have to try to have an educational component of our foreign service to try and help people, and the same is true over with the former Soviet Union countries as well. They still haven't really learned how to be able to function as a democratic society, especially in the economics. I somewhat jokingly, as though it had some popularity, I suggested we should send 1 million lawyers over there, and a lot of people cheered at sending them over, but the purpose was to try and teach them how to have a commercial society. How do you work? How do you enforce a contract? And all these nations, those kind of things have been done so autocratically that it's very difficult for them to understand how they work in a more democratic situation.
Moving now to South America, again, all the administrations that you've watched come and go in Washington has tried to deal with the international drug problem. and now we are in with our military involved to some degree, and also heavily involved, I'd say, in Colombia, spending billions of dollars helping them. And the drug problem once was a international problem, and then maybe a national problem, and maybe a New York City problem. But over the last 6 months to a year, it's now a Rutland problem.
Yes.
It's now a Burlington problem, a Bennington problem. It's really at home here. Is this a war we have really lost?
I hope not. There certainly is indications that we really don't have anywhere near the control of it that we thought we had. And I'm saddened by that. I think we have to spend more time trying to work on the prevention side of educating young people the dangers and trying to prevent or to reduce the demand side. But hopefully we will find better ways to keep young people, and it's not just young people either, it's the people of all ages, to fully understand the damage they do to themselves. And then we have to still continue to better our enforcement tools and try to interdict the incoming supplies.
One of the things I see, and we get it in the literature as a CPA, and it's called money laundering, and how to detect it, how to work with it. And one of the biggest problems I understand that the large drug dealers have is what to do with the money, right? And if in fact, what to do with hundreds of thousands of dollars, and even millions, right? Why not change the color of the money once a year in January? And all of that money has to be exchanged. It all has to come out. It all has to be for all of us. And when I mentioned that to a colleague of yours, Ben Gilman, not a colleague, but you know Ben Gilman.
I know him well, yeah.
You know, he mentioned to me once that, that might be very costly and an inconvenience. It appears to me it's an inconvenience for all of us when we got the word on terrorism that we have to now go through airport security and all the inspections and so forth. Why not change the currency? And not only bring out all that drug money and make it a real problem for them to get rid of it, but also the underground economy with a whole other area that has a lot of cash. And why hasn't the country ever considered that, or does it make any sense?
Well, I don't know. It's an intriguing idea. There's no question about that. The money laundering, we've had problems for years with the mafia exchanges. In fact, we had it in Vermont here for a while down on the southern borders in the southeastern part of money coming over and purchasing lands back in the 80s, early 80s. So it's one way you can do it, but I just don't feel it. I think it'd be so cumbersome and disruptive. I'm not just sure how it would work.
Is there a way, and let's assume that that idea has some merit. Is there a way in which presenting it to you then could ask the people in Washington to check that out? Does it have merit? What would be involved in it? How does that work now when something?
Well, sure. If we're requested to do that, and my staff would look into it and talk with the people of the currency and all, and to try to get them to at least give it a legitimate look at to see if it has merit and what the problems would be.
I can't imagine, and maybe I'm understating it, being too naive, but I cannot imagine that the cost and the inconvenience comes anywhere near the cost of what we're going through to try to interdict drugs, and the cost and crime and so forth, and what it does to communities and to families. I mean, measured against that, you wonder if a feasibility probably shouldn't be done. To determine one way or the other doesn't make any sense. So,
okay.
Maybe you'll have me follow up on that. You're the chairman of the committee on the environment and public works, and we want to ask you a question on that, but we want to take our first call. We did promise 15 minutes.
Sure. All right.
Okay. Hello, you're on Q&A Live.
Hi.
And can you give us your name and your question for Senator Jeffords?
Yes, my name is Cynthia Browning. And first I'd like to say that I want to express my appreciation and appreciation of the people in southern Vermont for Senator Jeffords' support for the Battenkill and helping to preserve and protect the Battenkill watershed. And I'd like to ask him if there's any legislation currently up in Congress that would be related to or affect the the water quality of surface waters like the Battenkill that we should know about?
Well, I'm on the committee, as is pointed out, that gets into those matters, and we are looking now towards the future and the serious problems that we have throughout this nation of our infrastructure with regards to our lakes, the streams and rivers, and protected water sources and all. So I have a group studying that now, so we will be looking at what needs to be done to try to make sure that our waterways, like the Battenkill and all, are more free of pollutants and things which are disturbing to the habitation in the waterways and all. We're just starting out in these areas, but we have major problems in our waterways and the infrastructure involved with dams and all. So we'll be doing a lot of work on that in the next few years. So I appreciate your call.
Thank you, Cynthia.
You're welcome.
And also we will take questions from the audience, and I know Alec is around here somewhere with the mic, and he'll follow the question. But in the meantime, again, Senator, you're the chair of the Environmental and Public Works, and the Kyoto Treaty has gotten a lot of attention recently, or the lack of it by us not signing it. Where do you come off on that?
Well, I think there's a serious mistake for us to back away from the Kyoto Agreement, and I will be pushing the administration to reevaluate their decision to sort of back away. I think it's incredibly important that we back the rest of the international communities to understand what is involved with the environment and the potential for real disasters in the future if we do not take care of the pollution. I have a 4-pollutant bill, which the administration has a 3-pollutant bill. What they leave out is carbon, and I believe very strongly that we must work with under the Kyoto Agreement, which takes care of the pollutants in a much better way than the administration desires to do right now. So we're going to be at loggerheads on that one. But I believe very strongly we should join in the treaty.
And we should join even if Europe doesn't join, or would you make it, it'd be comparable, we'd have to go together with them in lockstep? Or?
Well, I don't know. I don't think that may necessarily be the case, but we have to work in cooperation with them and to try to reach the goals that they have established, whether it's necessary really to get involved in the treaty or not, but we ought to have a commitment to handle all of the 4 major pollutants rather than leave carbon out. As we know from the millions of years ago history, that the carbon is what's collected, and that's called in the coal. So if you take and you put all that back up in the air, you could have very strong climate changes, and you could just change things dramatically. So we'd be back in the eras of the dinosaurs, not necessarily going back to the dinosaurs, but with the climate.
It'd be a real problem. I see my producers telling me we have a question from the audience, and what is your name and what is your question?
You mentioned the Kyoto Treaty, and I've also heard that some of the new international business treaties, like the World Trade Organization current revamps, have some provisions that affect the environment. So I was wondering, if you're now the head of this environmental committee, how are international business treaties going to be related to that?
Well, I've only been, it's about a month now that I've been chairman, so I'm not as knowledgeable in everything that we're supposed to be doing, but we have to take a worldwide view on matters. The world is getting smaller all the time, and if we don't have a view which takes into consideration the whole world, we'll fall behind as far as leaders. And so I'm very strong in trying to get the international cooperation on treaties or whatever to try and make sure we do what we can to preserve the planet and not to end up with serious problems.
We have another question over here. And your name and your question, please.
My name is Brian Oakley. This question relates to pollutants like in the Battenkill and more agricultural. Have you thought of legislation giving the USDA a mandate of sustainable agriculture to protect us from the chemicals that are currently mandated as part of farming?
Thank you.
Well, that's primarily under the jurisdiction of the Agriculture Committee, but I will work in cooperation with them on these issues to make sure that we have a coordinated opportunity to not to disrupt what good agricultural practices should be. So that's all I can say at this point.
Let me follow up a question on the environment, Senator. In the last days of the Clinton administration, he passed a what would it be, coming from the president, a law or a regulation, if you will, that would remove more of the arsenic in the waters. Mm-hmm. And that has now gotten around to the various communities in the country, and it's going to be if they have to go from 50 parts per billion down to 10, that's going to be an enormous undertaking financially. At what point, and assuming for the moment that, and there's mixed science on that, mixed reviews from the scientists, at what point do we measure the cost of protecting the environment, and as a practical matter, against the what we need to do to protect the environment?
Well, that's always a very difficult question, and we do it all the time, though. We have to make those judgments, and based upon the risks that are created by the arsenic in this case. And then the government and the legislatures have to come to a conclusion on just what that standard should be, and that's being worked on right now, as you know, on the arsenic side. And then when we get to it and agree to it, then we have to enforce it.
Will that come before you in the Senate?
And to a certain extent, yes.
Mm-hmm. And so that this president's suspension of that regulation until there's more science reported on it. Will you wait for that to come out, or will you take the initiative on that?
That's under advisement right now. That's just newly happened, as you know, and we're looking at that as to what we shall do. Okay. And there is a bill I know someone's put a bill into strengthen the requirements on arsenic.
Okay, I see we have another question. And your name and...
Yes, my name is Michael Card, and I have just a current events question. The Northeast Dairy Compact is scheduled to become defunct at the end of September, and it's been in the news recently, and I just wanted to know, it looks unlikely that a formal legislation is going to be drawn up for them. Being in the Senate, where it seems like there's the biggest chance that an extension may happen, what do you think is the strategy that's going to be taken?
Well, I'm in charge of the strategy, so it's a good question in that sense.
I think you might want to tell our audience exactly, briefly, what the Northeast Dairy Compact is.
Actually, the Northeast Dairy Compact was something that I worked with Vermonters, and Representative Bobby Starr from up in the northern part of the state came up with a very excellent idea, and that is that rather than having this very difficult and unfair tug of war between the people purchasing the milk and those that are producing the milk, because if you've got a truckload of milk, you know, in about 3 days it's gone, and you're not in a very good bargaining position with a guy sitting out there saying, look, I'll give you $1 a gallon for your milk, and they said, well, I can't, it costs me $2. They said, well, I'll just sit and wait if you change your mind, because it won't be worth anything. It's a horrible position to be in. So we had to intervene, and Bobby Starr's idea was to get everybody to sit down, including the consumers, including the farmers, including the people that purchase the milk, and to work out a system that would give a fair price. And it's been working, and it's working so well. The problem is it's working so well that some of the other areas of the country, the Midwest in particular, and I'm in a personal struggle right now in the Senate between myself and the Midwestern senators, to try and get them to understand that it's to their benefit, to everybody's benefit, if this system were to work. We now have 26 states that have passed laws authorizing compacts, and it's working. The other problem is the administration has taken a real, as well as the Wall Street Journal, have taken the position that no, you shouldn't get involved in this. This is interference, and they call it a cartel. What's the opposite of a cartel? It's people sitting down and negotiating a price. It's working perfectly, and it doesn't cost the government anything, because they haven't had to purchase any of our milk since it put in. So it's working well. But when I go back, we're going to be right into that fray again, and I'm hopeful we can be successful, but it's not going to be easy. It expires at the end of September. I'm hopeful we'll get it done. We're looking for a 5-year extension and also an expansion to allow other of the Northeast, let New York and New Jersey and maybe Pennsylvania come into the market system.
If I can follow up on that, because I did have it as a next another area. The compact, my understanding is also that it does cost the consumer a little bit extra. That the reason you're involved in it in the first place is that you in Congress is that the Constitution prohibits the states from getting together to set the price of a product, in this case milk. So that's why we need you involved in this. And also, it allows our farms in Vermont to possibly stay in business. Right? Now, one of the criticisms from this, and the Wall Street Journal did mention this, but they were quoting the Boston Globe, is that if in fact one of the goals is to keep Vermont farmers or New England farmers, small farms in business, they mentioned that there were 44 farms in Massachusetts that went out 2 years before the compact, and then 113 in Vermont. And 2 years after the compact was put in place, another 153 farms went out of business in Vermont and 44 in Massachusetts. Is the compact really doing what it's supposed to do in trying to save the small farms, in your opinion?
It's not doing as much as we'd like to see, but the amount of milk production has stayed the same in the States, which means what is happening is the smaller farms are getting bigger and more efficient, and they're producing milk, and others are going out of business. Trying to get too involved right here in the other aspects of it, but so it's working in the sense that the price is staying up, and you can make a living at it, but for whatever reasons, others are going out and others are expanding. So the actual workings of the system are such that the price to the consumers has stayed very stable. The income to the farmers has stayed stable, and it is allowing the farms at least the same milk production. But how many produce it is a problem.
This compact, or trying to get it passed, which Mike Card was right on it. I gather it expires in September 30th.
September 30th, right.
It tells you a lot about Washington and what goes on down there. If I'm not mistaken, in 1999, when it was renewed after the 1996, when it first came into existence, it was very important that you get this through, and you did. And you did so, I believe, and you correct me, with Senator Lott's help. Senator Lott now was criticized by Senator Daschle at the time for doing what he did, because I guess Senator Daschle was from the Midwest.
Right.
So it benefits him that his farmers out in the Midwest not to go along with this. Senator Lott now is not going to support you, I gather, but Senator Daschle will. What goes on in Washington? I mean, can you help us lay people with this?
Well, we wouldn't want to do that. If you understood the process, you'd be so disarrayed.
I wanted to go back to Ireland. Yeah.
Anyway.
But doesn't it tell you quite a bit of the insight of what you have to do to live there? I mean,
well, I'll be very candid with my good Vermont audience. How it started was the compact was in real trouble, and it was expiring. This was way back, and I had an opportunity to take advantage of the fact that my single vote, again back then, was the difference on whether or not the Finance Committee could get their tax bill out. And so I told them, I'm not going to vote for your tax bill until you take care of my compact. And so the agreement reached was that they would make it permanent. And so I wouldn't have to go through all this stuff. Well, but anyway, I let the tax bill go through after I got some changes in the tax system as well to help low-income people and others tax credits, so we worked a deal out. In fact, I made the conference committee come back into being, so they, at the middle of the night, at midnight, they had to get the House members all over and everything else, so it was one of those kind of things, whatever. So anyway, that's the way we got to that point. So it was supposed to be made permanent, but he couldn't negotiate with the House, so we ended up with the extension. But getting back to the key things here is that you point out the Constitution requires 6 small states, if they want to have a compact, to get together, which California, which is one big state, they have a compact, but they don't have to go to Congress. So they run the same kind of a milk system that we do, but because they're a big state, they don't have to go to Congress. Because we're 6 small states, we have to go to get the authority from the government to do it. And is that rational? I mean, if it's a good system, why make it go through because of the Constitution, you have to go through it, and it's the same system.
You've always been given credit for taking the high ground, the high moral ground. Does this bother you in many cases where you have to, like, and I'm only making the assumption here, that you have to give up a lot. You want this compact to go through. It's very important to you. Right? Short of selling your soul, and you know, someone from California says, look, you meet in the halls of Congress, and look, Jim, I'll support that compact, but you better support my B-1 bombers.
Yeah.
How do you, or the senator from Connecticut, Senator Dodd, you know, Jim, I need a submarine out of Groton. Right? How do you reconcile that to us lay people now? Because this is what really bothers all of us.
Sure. Well, it should.
Okay.
But
how does
this is age-old stuff.
I realize it.
They always say, you know, 2 things you don't want to see made in this world are sausage and laws. If you ever saw how sausage was made, you'd never eat it. But it's the way the system works, and these are the things you have to go through. But 26 states now have passed laws authorizing getting into compact relationships.
Well, I hope you don't have to, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I hope you don't have to give up too much to get it through. But I know it's important to you.
Yeah, no, it is. It's important to Vermont. Vermont without cows in the hillside is just not Vermont, and that's when you get down to it. That's what a lot of it's about. And
but I don't think we want to see a lot of aircraft carriers in the ocean in order to have cows in Vermont. So.
Or a ballistic missile system.
You got it. Yeah, that's another thing we could talk about. I see there's a question from the audience, Senator, and I'm sorry to have to keep you waiting, but we had to get through the compact. Your name?
My name is Randy Niffen from Middletown Springs. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Randy.
Okay. Senator Jeffords, you changed the political landscape a few months ago, and as an intelligent person, you must have had clouds of doubt and wondering. I'd like to ask you to think about this for the next half hour or so, and then perhaps answer. Has there been a time, maybe when driving along, when you just thought, yes, I really did the right thing? Was there something that you saw or heard, a story, perhaps a small story that you saw or heard that really did chase those clouds of questioning away? But I had an immediate question concerning the dairy compact. You mentioned that it might add a few cents to the wholesale price of milk, but isn't there a recent study, Senator, from the Boston and Milwaukee, Wisconsin areas that discounts or refutes that in effect, where the Texas-based cartel is not in power, retail prices of milk are cheaper, regardless of the fact that there is a Northeast Dairy Compact in existence in that area. Are you familiar with that recent study comparing those 2 cities?
Thank you, Randy.
Yes, I am. My staff is studying it. I know of it. I have not got the report back to them as to whether or not that the accuracy of that study. But there are studies that show a lot of different things. All I know is that the system, the compact, the states that have it find it has really worked well and has accomplishing the goals, and there's no reason to throw it out. And when it's working as well as it is, and so I'm going to keep on making sure that it stays in business.
The another area where you had previously been involved in your other committee, the health committee. Is that right? The health
That's
education.
right.
Bring
Health,
that.
we call it the health, education, labor, and pension.
Okay.
Yeah.
When the governor was on here last month, he confirmed with us the fact that we have 132,000 Vermonters receiving some form of Medicaid state health, and 120 in Medicaid and 12 under the pharmaceutical program, or 25% of Vermont's population. And he did confirm that it was the national average is 14%. What are you doing as our senator to try to bring that down? Although I must say the governor, if we had to go to 40%, he said he would go to 40%. Not that he would want to, but how do you feel about that, having served on the committee and chaired the committee?
Well, now I'm also on the committee, finance committee, and we are looking into these problems with Medicare and Medicaid, and working with Paul Harrington, who's from Vermont here, a very fine person. And we're going to revise and to restructure some of these programs to make sure they're more equitable as far as the various states are concerned. And Vermont gets, basically in those areas, much less per capita back than most other states do. That's true also of other small states. So I have a feeling that especially like South Dakota and places like that are very similar, as well as Iowa, which is the chairman or now the ranking member on the finance committee. We're in position to do something, and we're seeing that it has not been fair to the smaller states. And so we're working with the governor now to try and improve, to make sure it's more equitable.
It appears, and he didn't quite confirm this, but he was heading towards this, was that in that he wanted to take care of the health of the residents of Vermont at the expense of education. So a lot of monies, even though we spend money on education, a lot of monies from the state treasury are going into this to fund this 25%. And in a way, it's given us Act 60. And a lot of the state revenue that used to go into the education under the foundation sharing funding we had in '87, it got less and less, and more went over to this other area, which obviously is a concern. It would be helpful if we can get more aid, I gather, from the federal government to handle the Medicaid. But how do we bring the percentage down? 25%. I mean, we're one of the highest in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, that must be upsetting to you to see that we're that
Well,
high.
it is, and that's why I'm working on it. The small states, though, are a small part of the budget, too, so that the economic or ramifications on the federal government's resources are small relative to the damage that's done for the small states, because they have a smaller percentage coming in the federal fund. But the worst thing, in my mind, to do is to use education funds for that. I think education it's the most critical problem we have in this country right now, is our educational system. And if we don't improve that, we're just not going to be very well off in the future, and that's showing up all the time now. And in the studies, we have to bring in some hundreds of thousands of people from all over the world, because our kids don't learn sufficient mathematics in high school to take jobs that should go to high school students. But now we have to bring people in. We have a serious problem in education in this country. I don't think it necessarily has to be a trade-off from one to the other. We can afford both, but not the way we're allocating resources right now.
But it appears from the governor's presentation that here in Vermont we can't afford both, and he's made, and I asked him the question, you know, he's a physician, and he elected to go, if he has to make a choice between education and health, he'll go to health. And I'd hope to see that we don't have to make those choices.
They shouldn't
anymore.
have
I guess
to make
that's where you...
The federal government is not doing what it should. It should be fully funding IDEA, the fund that we promised. And I was one of those that wrote the law back in 1975 to say that we would fund 40% of the cost of special education. And we have not done that. We're nowhere near close. If we did that, that would greatly decrease the problems we have in funding education.
Mike Card, who's here from The Advocate, wrote a piece a while back on that the real problem in healthcare very well might be the lack of nurses. And we've seen now several institutions in this area, one just across the border, one in Bennington, that were closed down because of lack of nurses.
Right.
Are we covering up the real problem in medicine by saying that, you know, maybe the high cost of insurance, and no doubt that's a problem. Is the real problem going to be the lack of nurses?
In the future, that's quite correct. Vermont has the highest percentage of older nurses of any state in the country. We're going to be the hardest hit. And if we don't produce more young people coming in, or anybody, and coming into the nursing professions, we're going to have serious problems in the not too distant future. And Vermont has about the worst position for that. Again, it gets back to education. We just don't have the schools that are producing the teachers to teach nurses, or and any of the other areas. And until we do something about that, this is countrywide, we're just going to be diminishing in our ability and the capacity to take care of our people. It's a very serious problem.
Do you have access to information that the public doesn't have about the possibility that, you said in the short-term future, or the not too distant future, that if it was made available to us, like, are we looking at the closing of major hospitals in Vermont, nursing homes? Do you have access to that information? That if it was given to us, it would be like panic time, or?
Well, close to it.
Right?
I've had hearings on it, spoken out on it, on the nursing shortage. It's well known, but nothing is at the point of crisis such that you see any indication of substantial change in taking care of it. It's teachers too. Math teachers, we talked about earlier, same problem. A math teacher can get twice as much going out and working in a business because of the math skills as they can teaching. And that's a stupid system when you're going to end up with nobody teaching that knows math, and then we have to get hundreds of thousands of more people come into this country because our educational system's failing.
I see, Senator, we have another question from the
All
audience,
right.
and he's been patiently waiting. Sir.
Senator, I'm Tim Medley,
And Tim, where are you from?
Mississippi. We're visiting here. Senator, I want to ask you about the Republican Party. I think when you came into the Congress, the leader of the Senate was Senator Everett Dirksen, who was a grand old man for the grand old party. Has the Republican Party changed significantly in the last 20, 25 years? Is there a certain mean-spiritedness with certain aspects of the right in the Republican Party? Are the edges a little sharper now than they were 20 years ago? Can you compare the two for them, today versus 25 years ago?
Well, I don't know whether quite in the terms that you utilize, but when I came in 5 years ago, I came in during the Watergate year. That was the worst time probably in history for Republicans. At that time, we had 92 new members of Congress, of which 16 were Republicans, 17 finally. So it was a wipeout. Well, that was a disadvantage. One of the advantage to me was that you had instant seniority because there weren't any other Republicans. So I ended up in my first term and having a luck of the draw. Among my peers, you drew lots as to what your position would be on the committees you took. Well, the first one was for agriculture, and there were 5 slots open, and I drew number 1 to start with, and so that's good. That put me on the chairman of the ranking on the subcommittee on dairy. And then I drew for Ben Gilman, who couldn't be there, and I drew number 1 for him, made him chair ranking on the Foreign Relations Committee. And then I had 4 slots on the Education Committee and available, and they said, "Jeffords, you're drawing last." And I said, "Yeah, that sounds fair." And they left me number 1. So I ended up being ranking on the Select Education Subcommittee, which wrote 94-142, the law for the handicapped, and so that's how I got started. But I started at that time. Of course, that was with President Ford, and then we went to President Carter, and then we went on to President Reagan. But so I've gotten so far along, I forgot what the question was, but that's all right too. But anyway, things for the Republican Party were obviously at the pits at that time. But I spent all day, if you don't know, with Mike Wallace. So I'm getting a little numb in the brain right now.
No, you're doing just fine. And let me.
So interact.
I'm going to take a question from the audience just in a minute, but before I take it, let me just move you down to again back here locally in the state.
Yeah.
We talked about the economy and what have you. This area has seen, southern Vermont has seen. It's almost it's such a contrast when you go up to Burlington and Chittenden
Yeah.
County and see so much energy up there. And expansion and what have you. But here in southern Vermont, and, the southeast and the southwest, we have closings at Stanley Tools, ChemFab, Pressbook, or Book Press, I should say, over in Brattleboro. From your perspective as a senator in Washington, do you get involved in assisting in trying to keep companies here in Vermont or bring companies to Vermont to help the economy and not make us so dependent on tourism? And
We're of limited extent to do that, but we try. We have ways that we can work with the Department of Labor and other areas that we can get assistance to struggling businesses to try to help them financially or whatever. But I know I've came from Rutland, and we're right on the border. Rutland hasn't grown, we've just been able to hold on to the jobs. The GE has expanded a few jobs. So I understand that feeling. Then you go up north, up to Burlington in that area, which is booming, and you wonder why it can't spread down. I will have opportunity in the new committee structure I have in making available resources for roads and railroads and all those kind of things. So I assure you that I'm aware of that problem to see what we can do to put, at least as far as infrastructure, to put the southern part of the state in better shape than it is right now.
okay, and now I'll take the question. And where is the question? Here we are. Your name, please?
My name's Marisa Weil, and I wanted to bring you back to education. I was just kind of curious what steps you would like to take to see progress nationwide and statewide in teachers' wages, students' topics, just overall improving the system. And what steps in the future or late future you'd like to see?
First of all, I think we need more resources, and those resources have got to come from the federal government. And one of the reasons that's getting back to the question I haven't answered yet as to why I did what I did recently was the fact that the federal government and Republican right wing has the feeling that the government must not get involved in financing education. And I don't know whether it goes back to the Hitler Youth programs or whatever it is that they look at to see the dangers. But to me, the federal government should be more deeply involved in funding education. We can't expect the property taxes to go up anymore around this country and to try and do the job. We just don't have the resources. So until we get that, and that's the main reason I changed right there was to give you the depth of that. When the budget passed out of the Senate and went over to the House, we had $450 billion, billion with a B, dedicated to be spent on education. When it came back from the House, there were $0 for education. And that was the reason that started my thinking that I had to change, because that it's absurd to not recognize that the federal government has a role to play. And the way they could do it, it's interesting, was the fact that for the first time since the 50s, you had a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican President. And what they did to the Senate came up with a proposal for $450 billion. We sent it down to the House, and the House, the Speaker has much more control. So what they did was they house cleaned it. They took all of the money out, and then they send it back to us. And the only option you have when it comes back is to either vote yes or no. You can't change it. So you struggle, and so you say, well, you've got to have a budget, so you end up voting a yes, which happened, and we just wiped out all the education. And that was because of that. But I also understood at that time that for the first time since 1881, it was the only time that you had an even balance of senators in Democrats and in Republicans. And that was a place of opportunity for me because that meant that I could turn that situation around. I could, by switching over, I could change who set the agenda from the Republicans in the Senate to the Democrats. And by doing that, not only that, the Kyoto Treaty, all these other things we talked about, there would be a change. And I realized once recognizing that, I had a responsibility, a tremendous responsibility, to examine whether I should do that and change the course of history, basically. And I thought education was so important that I had to do that to make sure that we could take and spend adequate resources on education. That was the primary reason. A lot of others, women's choice, all those kind of things got into the problem. But that hit right on why I did what I did, because you can't expect this nation to compete with other nations. I'll give you another example, child care. Every other industrialized nation in this world takes care of 3- and 4-year-olds in their public educational system. We don't do anything for it. Except we have Head Start, but Head Start is a wonderful program, but all it does is to get the kids to be able to socialize. It has no educational component to it. And so you end up with 40% of our 3- and 4-year-olds getting no educational opportunities in that level. And guess what? 40% of the 4th graders in this country can't read at the 3rd grade level. Now, maybe it's purely coincidental, but it's not, as you know. So we have to do something about that. And that's another thing that I hope we will see a change in. I did get some changes on the tax side to help especially the working poor to be able to, on child care, to do a better job in other areas. But that's a serious problem we have, is our allocation of resources to education. If we don't solve that, all the problems you talked about, jobs and everything else, are all related to that.
I promise that. And there's a question out there. I'm going to take that in a minute. But I said that by around 8 o'clock I'd like to get into and you hit it right on the head, the leaving. I call it the leaving, if you will.
Yeah.
And I don't think, you hear often why you left. People, that's a question that comes out. I tried to look at the chronology and getting ready to have you come on. And I know it's very simple, and I could take an easy way out by saying, okay, you were snubbed in April with when the Teacher of the Year from Vermont.
Yeah.
All right. You were upset when you met with Chris Dodd, and you said, look, the President's giving us $7 billion. I want $10 billion for special ed or whatever it was at that time. But let me ask this question first. Is there anything in the book contracts that prohibits you from telling us something that you're going to reveal in the book, whether the book in September or the one a year from now?
No.
There's nothing, we're not going to know anything new then that we don't know already?
No, I'll tell you everything tonight.
Okay, very good. All right. Well, you know, we have a young director of the show here, and he would like to get a scoop, so I'm trying to, I'm trying to advance his career. The other one is, let me go back to the beginning of the show, where I mentioned the fact that, or earlier, where you were running for, your interest in running for state, running for governor. In 72 against Luther Hackett, and in 82, when you were thinking of leaving Congress, coming back to Vermont and running for governor. And then the Republicans, there was quite a primary fight back in 72, if I'm not mistaken, and you lost to Hackett. Is that right? And then he lost to Governor Salmon, is it?
No, I had beat Governor Salmon 2 years before by 60-40 for Attorney General.
Attorney General.
And then I lost to Luther Hackett, and then Tom Salmon ran against Luther Hackett and beat him 60-40.
Right, and then...
And that gave me, rose the perspective in some people's minds that perhaps I could win when it came to the House race. And then we had 3 in the House race, and that had a primary with Madeline Harwood and Jack Burgess. And but the fact that I had beat Tom Salmon, I think, gave me even though it was a primary, they felt that I had the better chance of that Watergate year of being able to win in December.
The question I have is not so much that you've always been an independent, and although people are attributing your leaving to the Bush administration over the last few months and so forth, and I'm just trying to see if there isn't, the genesis of this doesn't go back to that bitter fight in '72, the fact that the Republicans put Snelling up against you, or they had Snelling run in '82, and then you went back to the Congress, because you've always voted, as you were mentioning earlier here, as sort of independent. You didn't back the President Reagan in '81 on that major tax cut, which was, as we know, our CPAs was one of the biggest
disasters of all time. Right?
I don't call it a disaster, but it was a very complex and very involved tax change. You were the only Republican to vote against it. You were not. You didn't stand with the administration on many of the Central American issues. You more recently, in the early years of the Clinton administration, you backed or co-sponsored Hillary Clinton's health plan. So, and then there's others and others, and I don't want to bore you with it all. But the thing is, you have been an independent person almost your whole political career. I think what it is why now? I mean, Gingrich was going to do away with the Department of Education, and you hung in there as a Republican back when he had power there. Why now? Why not way back then? Tell everyone I'm going to run as an independent. You probably would have won. And then isn't that what really bothers a lot of Republicans that you work with or know, and so forth?
Well, first of all, to go a little to Vermont history. Vermont has always been was always totally Republican at the beginning. We were the most Republican state. In fact, we were really the first Republican state. Wisconsin snuck in there because back then the Republicans who had decided, I think, to do it on July 4th held off because the Northwest land treaty or whatever was made, which eliminated slavery, and so they wanted to celebrate the elimination of slavery in the Northwest Territories. So they postponed it a week, and Ripon, Wisconsin shifted in ahead of us and became the first Republican state. But actually we were, because we were the first ones that elected a Republican to higher office, governor, and we were had the first chairman of the Republican presidential convention, all that. So, and then you had the later on it was the Gibson-Aiken, and there was the Davis side of the party. We had a two-party. That's why we had the primary as close as we could to the general election, because the general election was irrelevant. If you won the primary in Vermont, it was all over. Well, things changed in the 60s. First of all, we had the huge influx from the young people with their Volkswagens and all came roaring up to Vermont, and we had horrible problems of land sales and all. It was just a messy time. But we've always been a one-party Republican, but there was a liberal moderate and there was a conservative. So that's the genesis of it historically, that how Vermont, and so I came up in the Gibson-Aiken wing of the party. So it's closer to be an independent or even a Democrat than it was to go with the right wing.
But what I guess what I'm trying to get at is, back in last year, I mean, it's so difficult, I guess, for people to reconcile the decision over the last few months.
Okay.
Why not last year? All right. I believe you were the co-chair, the honorary co-chairman of Bush's campaign here in Vermont. Was that any truth in that, or was that something you were given and not aware of?
Well, it was a little bit of both.
Okay.
I accepted it, yeah.
So, I mean, and Bush made it very clear, I think he did, you know, how he stood and all that. But setting that aside, you were, you and the Senator Craig from, is it from Idaho? And Senator Lott, you came up here and did some, you're going to sing for us tonight, by the way?
Sure.
Solo you're going to do, right? But wasn't there, you were very close with these as
Yes, right,
and so forth. And if you felt that way, or did you feel that way back then?
No, because the moderates had a role to play. And the moderates had, up through till just recently, had a real role to play in the decision-making process. Bob Stafford, his time was what they called a gang of six. There were 6 strong Republican senators who were sufficient number to attract also others to have a real influence on policy. That began to break down this year because both sides recognized that the power was in the middle. And so we did have the centrist coalition was put together. And the first meeting of the centrist coalition came, and the people that showed up, there must have been 40, almost 50 people that showed up, instead of 8 or 9 or 10, which we had been dealing with in the moderates. All of a sudden everybody is in the middle. Why? Because that's where the power was. Those were where the votes were. So when Judd Gregg showed up and said, "I'm a moderate," you know, he had the most conservative record in the Congress. So the games were being played. The power structure knew that they had to somehow get control of the moderates. And so the whole system broke down as the moderates were having an influence. Although we did have some on the tax process where John Breaux and myself and Olympia Snow and all formed a bloc that was able to get changes. So the whole moderate system had broken down as being able to broker the power.
I'm going to just interrupt us for a minute. There's a question in the audience, and I'm sorry to keep you waiting. And your name, please.
I'm Barbara Service from Southern Vermont College in Bennington.
Welcome, Barbara.
Thanks, Don. Good evening, Senator.
Good evening.
I'd like to take us back to the earlier discussion of both education and nursing. The state of Vermont did something I thought was quite incredible this year in terms of allocating an amount of money that students may take as a grant, and it will be forgiven for each year that they spend practicing in a Vermont hospital. Is there any chance, there's sort of 2 parts to my question, is there any chance that the federal government might consider something like that? Or is there any chance that the federal government will consider following your lead and raising the Pell Award in future years?
Yes and yes. No, we've got to do something, and the same is true for math teachers. We've got to have a way, whether it's loan forgiveness or whatever it is to attract more people into those professions, and I'll be working on all of those areas.
By the way, that was the president of Southern Vermont.
I know.
Okay, so
I've been down there and had wonderful times, and I know that
she still gives out grades, so you got to be careful.
well, that's what I was trying to soften her up. Yeah.
Is there another question from the audience? Oh, can we have a call? Let me take the call. Good evening. You're on Q&A Live. Oh, he has call sign up. I guess there's no call. Let me go on with this next question. You mentioned yourself a minute ago about the right wing and the conservatives and so forth. That gets quite a lot of usage in the press and so forth. We never hear about the left wing. Is it safe to say that, like, for example, that, and I don't want to put a label on someone, but Senator Kennedy now taking over your former committee, Hillary Clinton moving into some of her areas. If you were in the middle, or the moderates that you talked about, along the lines of Senator Stafford, and how important the moderate position is in the Congress, where are they, in your opinion? Are they the juxtapose the Lotts and the other conservative people that you had to deal with?
Well, right now, the moderates are, again, they're called the centrist group now, but it's John Breaux is the leading Democrat moderate, and Olympia Snowe is the leading Republican moderate, but there aren't many others now that are in that category. I was there, Arlen Specter is still there, and Susan Collins, to a certain extent, is there, and certainly Link Chafee is in that group, but it's not like it used to be, where there were at least about a dozen that you could expect would take a moderate position and change the flow of power.
But you know, where the criticism has been quite vehement lately, and ever since you brought this thing up about the right wing and the conservatives, have we now shifted to the other side? And now, and I bring that up because, and there's also the attitude. There was this lady who was the commissioner of consumer products, went up for a confirmation as the chair of the Consumer Products Safety Commission.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, there's a phrase now called Gall bashing. I think her name was Commissioner Gall. And she just received a terrible hearing. And it was people from the other side now. So are we just going from this side to this side? And I know that really must be upsetting to you and a lot of your colleagues that were in the middle and tried to keep the tone respectful and everything else.
No, I don't think so. I think it's still very much, you have the House. Now, this next election is going to be crucial. The next election, we have, I say we, and that's a Republican term, but the Republicans will have, I think, 20 seats up, and the Democrats 14 in the Senate. So the odds are very high, especially with the present tone of the politics, that the Democrats will increase their majority in the Senate by 3 or 4 votes. The House is similarly, and I'm not sure just when the recalculation of borders go with respect to redistricting, but at least when the redistricting occurs, that will show another shift towards the Democrats. So the present situation we have it's not, doesn't look like it's going to be lasting that long.
Is it possible, and I have a call here and I want to take that, and we may have someone in the audience I want to take as well. Is it possible that if things got to be as, quote, ugly on the left side as they were on the right for you, that someday we could expect to have you come back to the right side?
Yeah. I've told them I'm an independent, and I've made that very clear to Tom Daschle. In fact, right now I'm in a fix where they're upset with me because I'm negotiating out in Medicare, and I believe we should have Medicare reform as well as prescription drugs, and the Democrats have taken the position that no, we should just have prescription drugs and not have any Medicare reform. And the White House wants Medicare reform. So I've told them, on this issue, I'm not with you.
Okay. Let me just take the call, Senator, first. Hello, you're on Q&A Live. Hello? I guess the only button I have. Let me take the question here from the audience. Sorry to keep you waiting. And your name?
My name is Judy Goodman, and I'm in the hospitality industry in this area. And first of all, I just wanted to thank you, as everybody has been. I can't imagine that the timing could have been better for your decision, and I don't think there's any question that we're very pleased that it took place, but also the timing for your being in the Manchester area. And for, I understand, 60 Minutes is going to be broadcasting right in our foliage season. So yeah. I wanted to thank you for doing your part for Southern Vermont.
Well, that's right.
And for our hospitality, but what made you pick Manchester rather than Burlington and Montpelier?
Well, I could be very solicitous and say just to help you out down here, but it was convenient, and I love it down here, and I think it for the convenience of Mike Wallace and all that this seemed to be the appropriate place to do it. And it is such a beautiful place, and he was very happy to be here. So.
All right. The question I have sort of trying to pull all this together. When you made the decision, what gain did you see coming to Vermont, and what harm do you see coming to Vermont from this decision?
Well, I
if
think,
any.
yeah, I don't know. I didn't really look at it from that perspective, other than because I get, when I get into answering your question, then people come back and say, well, all you did it for was because you would do this, and it had nothing to do with my decision as to the benefits for Vermont. But the benefits will be by being the chairman of the committee which deals with the nation's resources of the Environment and Public Works Committee, which I'm the fourth Vermonter to hold that chairmanship. Justin Smith Morrill, which when he was there had all the federal lands and created the land grant colleges and all. So there's tremendous opportunity to do things. But we have very, very severe structure problems in all the way from water dams and things that are about ready to give out to the highways and the other infrastructure. I have the whole highway fund, which is under my control, not under the appropriators' control. So that's billions of dollars that I'm in charge of allocating. So it's a wonderful opportunity for those needs in Vermont.
But as a practical matter, Senator, being in Washington and having that control under your belt, under your control there, here in Vermont, there's such a reluctance to build highways. To build almost anything takes, and we talked about this with the governor, and he's quite frustrated with it. Many of the projects that we probably need do come under a great deal of scrutiny. They take forever to go through the process without any certainty that they're going to get approved. And it's costing, like the one we did talk about was the hospitals project, Breckenridge. $1 million was spent, and that was abandoned because of the Act 250, because of going into the prime ag land, which was a change from the Act 250 commissioner, the commission made at the last minute. So having all of that control in Washington, that you can spend money here in Vermont on highways and bridges and dams, I mean, if any place, I mean, this state is very reluctant to do any kind of work. You might have the money, but we might...
Well, if that's up to the state. I can't tell the state what to do, but I can make sure the resources are there for what they want to do.
Well, all I'm just saying is that an empty gesture to have gone to the committee but not be able to show that you now have this and we can give this money to the state, but we can't use it because we may not...
Well, that's the judgment of the Vermonters, and I accept their judgment.
Okay, and then with that we have 5 minutes left. Let me, unless there's other questions from our audience, let me ask one more question on the leaving. Should people in politics, once they commit to a political party, should they follow that party's label or banner? And if they're not going to follow it, should they inform the party and then go off? Not after the election, but at the next time of an election.
I don't think that in Vermont, for instance, if you take a look at the structure of people that vote, about 50% of the people have no party affiliation in the state. I mean, they don't consider themselves affiliated. We don't have a system according. And so anybody that runs for office, if they're going to win, it's got to go beyond a particular party, Republican or Democrat, or you don't win. So the label is not as important. And as I pointed out, historically in Vermont, there was only one party. You had the liberal Republicans and you had the conservative Republicans. So the term Republican in Vermont means differently than it probably does in other states, which have had traditionally left-wing Democrats and right-wing Republicans, right-wing.
But and you're absolutely right, and the governor basically said the same answer, although he said he probably wouldn't have left, but he did support, what you had done. But the point is, it may not have any significance in Vermont, but the label has quite a bit of significance in the way in which your committees and control of the Senate is set up. Mm-hmm. And that's the unfortunate part. Is that, and therefore, does it take on a higher level of importance then, which party staying with the party label. You follow what I'm saying?
Well, I'm not sure. Well, I guess the answer would be yes, but you have to vote your conscience. And to me, if you have a situation where we have in this country right now where the right wing is controlling pretty much the structure of all the government and is taken positions of allocation of resources, which the majority probably of this nation wouldn't accept, like cutting out education and building a ballistic missile system and all those kind of things. You have to vote your conscience of what's best for the nation. And when you're in a position that you can change that, you have to ask yourself, well, if I don't change it, and I think I should change it, but if I don't, then I'm going to be responsible for all of the problems that I'm trying to prevent. But if I do accept that responsibility and change the direction of government, then I will have done something good for this nation.
But if a voter in Vermont who's a Republican sends you to Congress knowing exactly how you vote, or just using you're the example, and know that you many times will vote on the other side and so forth. However, by maintaining the party label, the party banner, they know they will control the Congress, or in this case the Senate and control committees. If they know that you were going to make a switch, should you not have told them ahead of time that, look, I cannot hold on to this banner anymore. I'm going to become an independent. If that's the case, the Congress is going to go to the other side.
Well, the problem wasn't apparent.
And we have and my director shows me 1 minute.
Okay, good.
So,
that's not the time it came about. Okay. I mean, I had to accept when I went into the election, I did not think we would have either the opportunity nor the problems that were created by that election, so that we had a 50-50 split, and all those things happened after I was elected, not before I was elected. Okay. So faced with the new circumstances, I took what I believed to be the best course for the state and for the country.
Well, on that note, let me, on behalf of all of us here on the North Shire, give you a book from Hildene about another man who had to make many difficult decisions, Robert Todd Lincoln.
Yes.
We hope you take that. Thanking you for being here, and at the same time, a little book on this. And we had many other questions I wanted to ask on stem cell research, which you're going to be going back to deal with.
Yes.
And I just, from my perspective, just wish you stay out of harm's way and have a wonderful session when you go back. I gather it's in September.
Yes, right. It's about 10th or 11th September. I think.
Do you have anything you'd like to end with or tell our audience?
No, I said that just appreciate the great program.
Oh, thank you very much.
You're tough. You're tougher than Mike Wallace.
Well, well, he gets paid for it.
Right, yeah.
But no, we have a wonderful crew here, and I want to thank our director, and David Kane, who I shouldn't mention is now entering his senior year at Arlington High School, and he was the one who created this show 18 guests earlier in May of 19.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So it's a credit to our school system and a credit to David and his crew that he's put together.
It sure is, and I can see why the governor wants to come down again.
Yeah, he does, and he wants to have a debate here, and he's going to call the legislature back into session if, in fact, he can get Judy and Walt to agree on the Act 60. So we could all have a special session.
Well, that sounds exciting.
Again, thank you for being here.
Right.
Senator.
Good to see you.